We're just in a world right now that is so fast moving that we want to say little and get a lot of response.
Welcome back to the Culture Based Podcast. I'm Dustin. He's Blake. Episode 56, The Balancing Act of Information. Can't wait to talk to you about how much is too much or not enough. Before we do, I want to remind you that we're here to help leaders know what they're about, show where they're going, and develop a scalable team to get them there. If you're listening to this on an audio podcast platform, would appreciate a subscribe, review, whatever your platform allows you to do. If you're watching on YouTube, hello there. I'm very blue, I'm told. Blake is very orange, but we're doing it to see if you can tell what sports team we love the most with these two colors. If you guess it,
there's not an orange.
You guess it. No, blue and orange. If you guess it, which is a very real thing that we have discussed previously to right now, if you guess it, you get a free 30-minute strategy call with us.
Well, I don't know what team you're talking about.
Exactly. So okay. whatever team they guess, we'll be like, yep, that's the one I was thinking about.
Okay.
So little promo right out the gate. A little competition never hurt nobody. If you're watching on YouTube, again, blue and orange. What colors is that represent for us and our favorite sports team? That we clearly know and have talked about previously. Like, subscribe, and then ring the bell so you're notified every time we drop new content. I'm excited for some new content too. We've been kicking around some ideas to throw some additional things up on there. A lot of really cool shorts and whatnot, so check that out. Also, you can check us out on social media at The Culture Base, BASE. Or you can go to theculturebase.com, see what all we got going on. If you're a listener only, you can look at our ugly mugs and be like, man, they have a face for radio. And then if you want all the free stuff that we've been talking about recently, we have our own free ebook on there, the Scalability Playbook. It's yours absolutely free to scale your teams. You can go to theculturebase.com/resources, along with a bunch of other things like best interview questions ever and Uncultured by Blake Bear. You can download all those things for free at theculturebase.com/resources. All right, let's get into it. I don't want to go information overload because today we're talking how much is too much or how much is not enough. Now, anyone that knows me, Blake, knows that I would rather over communicate than under communicate. And I'm not so sure I'm willing to back off of that, especially when it comes to some of the science that we've heard. But where do you stand on this, Blake? Let's just start there. Would you rather have not enough information or would you rather have too much information?
Yeah, first off, I think that feel of like, I'd rather over communicate. Chances are what you think is over communication is actually getting closer to what the right amount of communication is.
Exactly.
We're just in a world right now that is so fast moving that we want to say little and get a lot of response. And as if they could read everything you're saying in the words you're saying and understand the context and understand all the other stories that had to lead you to your current mindset and what you're actually asking, we kind of hope that everyone else can do that. So the reality is, I think our over communicating is right communicating. I think over communicating is when you're just almost telling people information that doesn't even pertain to them. And you're like, well, I'm just trying to cover my bases. Well, you're trying to not be clear. You're not trying to cover your bases. You're just trying to say, well, the best way to be clear is to keep talking as much as I possibly can.
Yeah.
No, that's not clear.
Yeah, it's definitely a hack for me, right? Like, so we said all the time, like, hey, just when you start to get sick of hearing yourself say it, AKA you feel like you're over communicating, that's just the point when everybody's starting to hear it. So what Blake's saying in there, that's my hack, right? So I say I'd rather over communicate. It's my hack of a mental state, right? Of going, hey, I'm going to over communicate this, secretly, subconsciously knowing that's gonna appropriately communicate what actually needs to get done there. So we looked into some science about this, and I wanted to kind of paint the picture, Blake, You're smarter than me, but let's just talk some science for a second on the problem of this over communication. So people tend to think, well, like, this is the reason why I don't over communicate. It's because the brain can only process a certain amount of information at once. And when it's overwhelmed, it's called cognitive overload or information overload, as we call it. This can happen when there's too much information to process or when the information is too intense. It's like, for example, someone says something and it just blows you away, whether it's a bad news or good news, and they continue talking. You're like, I'm sorry, I can't even hear what else you're saying. That one thing just really hit me hard. That's what we're talking about here. Some factors that can contribute to information overload include multitasking, which is fake, short-term memory, which is real, and external factors, which are unfortunate. Those are my descriptors for each. What do you think about those, Blake? Multitasking, short-term memory, external factors, and what the problem is there with how people receive communication.
Yeah, I mean, first off, I think there's scientific evidence that shows that multitasking is not even a real thing.
Yep.
And the idea of trying to hold two things, you think you're giving energy because you feel busy. And I think busyness is one of the biggest lies in productivity and in communication. I think busyness is well, there's I don't remember who said it, but they said, when I get busy, I get dumb, right? Because I'm not fully engaging in one said thing. And so that kind of information, as you're trying to multitask, like, you're just not getting the clear stuff you need. And the other part of this is, and there are so many studies you're going to find, and it's fun to read all these studies, by the way. There are studies that show that our memory actually does hold on to everything we hear, but we don't have, regardless of whether that study is true or not, even like peripheral understanding, we have every bit of that information in our brain. And this is like more of a meta study that they did. But the problem is I can't access that. Okay, so there's the problem. Even if I do obtain every aspect of information I receive, I can't at will access what I forgot 10 seconds ago. When your brain's like, oh man, there's something on the tip of my tongue that was really important and I just can't reach it. Okay, if I can't do that with the stuff I actually care about, how am I going to do that with the subconscious aspect? I believe the subconscious is so strong, but I don't have the power to move my subconscious the way I need to with my conscious. So that's a challenge there. I think the other side, and this is the way I tend to think. So I like that study. I'm going to just pin that. I think there's probably truth there. But the other studies show that our brains are almost like a cup, right? And what comes in, there's a certain aspect that things push out to allow other things that your reticular activating system, your RAS, actually says important. Okay, so not only did you have to communicate a certain bit of information, but my brain as the receiver has to be able to say, I agree that this is important. And this is the problem with over communication that doesn't give clarity of what's important. And this is, I think, the big thing. When you just I'm giving them all information. I'm attaching them to every email. I'm letting them be a part of every chat. If all information's important, no information's important. So if you can get to a place where you can say, here is clearly what you need to know. I'm going to give you some peripheral things that are going on, but I'm not going to give you everything. Here's what I think is important. Any questions, any thoughts? Now you're telling them, hey, allow your reticular activating system to see this as important. And the other stuff, what do you think? You want to be a little creative? You want to let the back part of your brain kind of play here and the front part of your brain play here a little, but you're not telling them all of it's important. It's like the words ASAP. One of the worst ways you can tell someone when they need to have something done. Hey, I need this done ASAP. Well, that's not clear. Okay, because your as soon as possible is very different than mine. Mm-hmm. So you got to give clarity in what is actually important. If you're going to overshare, in air quotes, if you're going to overshare, you got to tell them what's important.
Yeah, Blake's jumping a little bit to the solution, but which is fine. But I want to just say this too. When we're talking about short-term memory, there was a study back in the mid-50s by a psychologist, George Miller. And what that study found was that a human's short-term memory can only store between 5 and 9 chunks of information at a time. Okay. In total, this is not just the work bucket of life or just the spouse bucket of life or the kids or the hobbies or the stressors, or this is in total. Short-term memory can only store between 5 and 9 chunks of information. Number one, this is classes in session with Dustin. Number one, that's why I write everything down. Yeah. Because I know that for me, that number is probably more like 3 to 6. Number two, if you are communicating to somebody on your team and you are giving them, let's say, 5 important things they need to know right now, and they need to act on it right now, and they need to not forget it ever, then what you're asking them is to dedicate more than 50% of their brain's capacity to you and only you for the foreseeable future. Not going to happen. Not going to happen. As much as you want people maybe to think that work is life, or maybe Michael Scott, we're all a family, like at the end of the day, they have so many other things going on that they don't have room to store. It's physically impossible for them to store all the information that you're trying to give them. So why are you trying to give it all to them? Which leads to what Blake was saying about what do they need to know? And secondly, I would say, what's the 1 to 3 things that they need to focus on, not just right here, right now, but this week? So I know Blake's company does a Monday kickoff meeting. A lot of companies do that. It's not abnormal. And a Monday kickoff, if you're like, hey, this is the team on the floor, you need to know from the top or from the office gang, these are 3 things that are big, really important for us to be able to deliver on this week. So if these are your big 3 for the week, the same way that you would do the big 3 for yourself or that we do in our full focus planners, these are the big 3 for, hey, shop floor, these are the big 3 for you this week. If it's not one of these 3, I want you to move it to the side until those big 3 are done.
Yep.
Or, hey, one big idea, one focus we're going to focus on this week. You know, we're the culture base. Maybe it's one culture value that you have as a team. Hey, you know what? This week we're going to focus on we is greater than me and how we're going to work together as a team. So I don't want to see anybody working alone this week. If you're working with somebody else for the whole week. You're instilling that one thing or the 3 big things on their task list to get done. So a big idea or a big 3 would be something that I would offer as a solution for this as well. Like we also, if you have anything to say about that before I move on.
Yeah. So one thing that's important, I think, on short-term memory to realize, because we're like Dustin saying, this is why I write everything down. Okay. The back side is short-term memory is also a liar in that the short-term memory says, oh, I'll remember that. Okay. That's like their catchphrase. I'll remember that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. You won't, because short-term memory is actually definable of only up to like 20 to 30 seconds. Okay. So we're not even talking about capacity, which was the 5 to 9 things you can remember. Now you've got a time period for that said capacity. Okay. So you say, yeah. So it's funny.
Things rotate in and out.
Mm-hmm. They say 5 to 9 minutes or 5 to 9 things within that 20 to 30 seconds you can remember. But when you get to 1 hour after that, like if I gave you 9 things to memorize and then you memorized them and you're like, oh yeah, I got it. And you got 5 to 9 of those things, maybe in 1 hour, you would be down to probably 3 to 4. Okay. So you have that capacity that already wasn't like a capacity. It's like, yeah, I guess we can put Pez in this dispenser and you only have that many, but now it's like half that. So it drastically every minute after takes bigger hits. So your short-term ability to memorize things, unless your brain's rewired in such a way, which some people are, okay, like they're rewired and can memorize things and have photographic memories, or there's other types of memories where you can see things visually. That's great. But you almost have to do that on every bit of information you're receiving. You don't get to be like, if you told me, hey, I need you to memorize 10 things, I would find some kind of device or pneumatic device or something to memorize it. And I could memorize that over years. But I had to tell my brain this is incredibly important. And I had to work at it for a long time to retain that bit of information, but I don't remember it all.
Yeah. And we also have to introduce, we talked about the multitasking lie. We've talked about the short-term memory, how would I say that? Confusion, the short-term memory confusion. Then there's also the real external factors that come into play here too, of the internet is a thing, social media, notifications, bing, bing, bing all day long. This is why things like do not disturb have become like that much more popular. It's the reason why I just bought a $6 timer this week on Amazon to help me, like, okay, I'm going to set this timer and I'm going to focus on this one thing only until that timer goes off, and then I'll shift to the next thing.
Yeah.
There's so many external factors that are vying for our attention, and you have to understand that as a team lead, that the same things that are vying for your attention, they may not be in the same language, but there's still a lot of similar things that are vying for the attention of your team.
Yeah.
And so remembering that and understanding what makes them tick. This is why we talk about, like, help leaders know themselves, is because, like, we want to help them understand what their communication tactics are, where they're working, where they're not working, how they're being received, how they're not being received. Like, this is, you can have all the best made plans in the world, but if you're not communicating them correctly, forget it.
Yeah.
So that's what we're after here today. I want to talk about too, Blake, if you don't have anything else to add to that. I want to talk about too, this whole meetings thing. Right. Most communication these days happens in some sort of meeting. And, you know, we've all read or at least heard of Patrick Lencioni's book, Death by Meeting. I can't say his last name without saying it like that.
It's okay.
That's just who I am. You have to deal with it. But in that, you know, they talked about, like, hey, you know what? We might not have to have these long marathon meetings. The reason most of these long marathon meetings take place, there's several reasons, but one big reason is that they try to tackle more than one problem at a time. And I will say, just to let the leader off the hook here, 9 times out of 10, the leader doesn't mean to let that happen, but the leader lets it happen. That's the emphasis. Someone at some point in that meeting, you're tackling this one problem. You have a clear agenda. This is what this meeting is about. We are going to tackle this problem, and we're going to leave here with a solution or a number of solutions for X problem. Then all of a sudden, someone in the room butts in and interrupts somebody and says, and that's another thing. That's where death by meeting comes in. And that's what will kill your communication more than anything else, is if you allow the phrase, and that's another thing, in communication, you have instantly created an exit ramp for everyone's mind in the room. And now we're no longer headed down the highway. We're on a back road somewhere, and we don't know how we got there, and we're lost. So stay away from, that's another thing. Tackle one problem at a time.
Yeah. Yeah. I think with the mentality of saying to people, and trying to, like, filter through, especially in meetings, like what's worth saying, what's not worth saying. I think a lot of times leaders, and this is knowing your communication style too. Like, are you a drive-by communicator? Do you just roll by and you say something and you think they understood it? They didn't.
Hey, don't forget that big project due later.
Yeah, right. Yeah, those things don't do it. And one thing that I think is important to start believing, because then that drive-by communication led to anxiety for the other person who's like, I don't want to sound stupid. I don't want to sound stupid asking what they meant. So now there's like a cultural issue there, right? They're afraid to say something. And then, or time spent on not that thing that they actually wanted. And then guess where all this drives to? A meeting. And then the meeting is what I meant to say was this and how I really wanted this. And now you've got 4 people in this meeting costing $200, $300, $400 an hour to have a conversation about something that could have been done, which means you didn't save time. You didn't save time. No. You wasted time. And we don't see the paradox because we think meetings are necessary, but most meetings aren't necessary. Most meetings could be taken care of by clarity and probably having your expectations and timelines and things you actually like. What does done look like? We talk about that a lot. Just clarifying those things. And that's all you got to do. And you're like, oh, but I don't want to sit down and write an email. Cool. Just go have another meeting then. Like, and I'm telling you, that one's going to take more time than just doing the clear communication once. Okay.
Yeah,
and I would also say, a lot of times we try to catch that, like, hey, does that make sense? Bad question. Hey, you understand? Nope. Another bad question, because nobody wants to sound like they're stupid. Okay. One of the best things I've ever learned is, hey, what still needs clarity about this? Hey, do you need clarification? I love asking if people need clarification. It is way less about whether they have knowledge and intelligence and more about, what am I not clear about? Hey, what clarification do you need on this? Well, I think I need clarification on, how do you want me to bring about doing this? Well,
Is there an
maybe
approach
this,
that you'd rather me take? Is there a
exactly.
lesson that you've learned in the past about the wrong way to do this?
There you
Impart it
go.
on me, a great teacher, before I make a mistake and ruin everyone's dollars and money and time.
Yeah.
So, yeah, absolutely. And what I love about what Blake just asked too is they're open-ended questions, right? It's not because if you give a closed-ended question, like a yes or no answer question, then they have the opportunity immediately to get out of it from, like, with fear, right? It's the fear of, I don't want to sound incompetent, in front of this person who's giving me direction, who signs my paychecks maybe. But I don't want to be unclear. Yeah, there's so many fears there associated with that.
Yeah.
I was going to say too, like, if we're not sponsored by Loom by any means, but if you're like, hey, I want to be able to communicate this clearly, directly, with inflection of my voice, but I don't need to necessarily have a $300 or $400 meeting, which we should talk about the costs of meetings sometimes. But like, it's a free 5-minute Loom away. It could just save you. And it doesn't have to be Loom. It could be, you take out your phone and film what you're doing real quick and just say, this is what I'm doing. This is how you should do it. Let me know if you have any questions, or what's not clear. Right. So it's so easy to throw those things in there. I think we just often have made up our mind before we get into it that, oh, this is going to cost us a meeting. Mm-hmm. It might not, if you tackle it in the beginning. Yeah. Which brings me to my last solution that I have for today, which is repetition is key. Mm-hmm. And something that Blake said last week when we were talking about communication, or maybe it was 2 weeks ago, I can't remember. We were talking about how, we need to keep the energy up. It was 2 weeks ago. We need to keep the energy up when we're communicating these things over and over again, because otherwise it can get real Ben Stein. Everybody knows Ben Stein, the Clear Eyes guy.
Love that.
Clear Eyes, Bueller. Like,
man, that was good.
Thank you. I've been working really hard on it. So, like, it's a little bit Eeyore sometimes too. I didn't mean to go Eeyore on you, but yeah, repetition is key. But keeping the energy up in the repetition, new angles, new stories, new ways. But you're not going to say the exact same thing the same way with the same inflection necessarily all the time. Like, but you need to repeat it. Repeat, especially if we know that these buckets that everyone's walking around with can only hold but so much. You have to keep refilling the bucket, because it's going to come out somewhere, and it may come out in a way that is a forgetful way, or it may come out in a way that it's a productive way, or it may come out in a way that's a harmful way because they didn't clearly understand it. So keep repeating and keep refilling that bucket.
That's good. I don't have anything else, man. I think that slaps it. I think it's just know that good communication is not like, we put so much on the receiver of being the good communicator. If you are a leader and you're leading culture and you're trying to have a scalable team, then it's you. You are the one who drives good communication in the right amount and not the right amount. And it's just like if you, your spouse, your significant other, whatever, there gets to be a point where you each know each other's style. You know the right questions to follow up on. How, when they say this, they actually mean this. You kind of get into those vibes, and that's taken years. Why do we think we can get there? Because I have it in a good way with my spouse or my significant other. Why do I think that I can just do that with everyone? You got to spend more time in order to get to those levels, to have that level of communication. So in the time being, say it over and over, say the things you really are important and highlight those things. And then as soon as they're annoyed with you because they're like, yes, I know you want this. And you're like, that is what I want. That's a good sign that you can start having I don't need to overdo it on them, because they're going to get annoyed because they do get where the communication's happening.
Yeah. Yeah. And just to kind of put a bow on it as well with what Blake's saying, I think it's important for you as leaders or a leadership team to come together and to define at each level of the organization the appropriate amount of information. We kind of went back to the beginning here where Blake was talking about what you need to know, what people on your team need to know. Please don't leave that up to chance or a guessing game of what people need to know. Make sure that you and your entire leadership team, whether you're just one of many or you're one in the middle or you're the one at the top, make sure everybody really understands, hey, this needs to be communicated to our director level, right? Or this needs to be communicated to the floor level up, like whatever the kind of org structure or accountability chart looks like. That's why accountability charts are so important to be able to have, is you can look at it as a team and go, really, it's from here on up on the accountability chart that they need to know this, because it'll affect the way that they lead and guide their teams or their departments. Or really, this isn't all everybody needs to know this, because everyone's going to feel it from the top down.
Yeah.
Or the bottom up. Have that discussion. If you're like, what's one thing I need to take away from today? I would say have the discussion with your leadership team about what amount of information is appropriate and at what time. Because if one of you is off or unlinked or unaligned on that, it could really cripple the house, and it'll take a while to repair. That's when we walk into these companies and we see cultures kind of broken down. It's usually because somebody broke a communication barrier that they should or shouldn't have. And it's just not, and now we're having to repair the foundation. We're having to repair the house.
Yeah. Culture and good communication are always evolving. Okay. So that means that your level of communication at a 2 to 3 person company transitioning to a 12 to 15 person transitioning to a 30 to 40, and it's always evolving, and not always just with numbers. Sometimes it's evolving with style and technology. And if you think that I'm locked in on my level of communication and that's all I need, like, then you're not becoming a learner of people and learning how to communicate in the right ways. So that would just be the thing I'd say, is give yourself a break, learn from it, and learn from your experiences on the bad communication. If your response is the reason, like, I told them all this stuff and they just don't get it, that's not good enough. Like, that is a bad first thought about communication. Like, I was in a meeting today where I screwed up big time on communication, and I saw it and I was like, I should have spent more time there. And it hurt. It hurt people. And I just said, my bad. This is on me. I screwed up here. How do we make this better? Please help me see how to make this better. You will have way more buy-in from your team when you just own the mistakes of the bad communication. And even if they have areas in there, just own it. Like, what's that going to do? Who cares? So I own the problem, and it was my problem, and I learned from it by asking for help to be a better communicator. You will get way better communication when you listen to it.
I love it. That's today's episode on communication overload, or the balancing act of communication, as we call it. Next time, we're going to be back with you, episode 57, I believe it is. We're going to look at what your default DNA is. We're kind of in this we're not even really officially in like a series of podcast episodes, but we've been talking a lot about communication because it's important, and we're coming out of the summer and everybody's getting back into the routine. Everybody's kind of getting back in their rhythm. Let's talk about what your default DNA is as a company and how we can not only identify it, but shift it if we need to, because knowledge is power. And when we understand where we're coming from as an organization, we can steer the ship better. We can know ourselves, the process, and we can just scale the whole thing the way that we need to scale it. That's what we're here for. We'll talk to you next time on the Culture Based Podcast.